The tragedy of mercy. The stars were calm, and the Mercy's hope drifted silently through the vastness of space. A hospital ship like no other, it carried life-saving medical supplies and hundreds of doctors, nurses, and medics to the farthest reaches of the galaxy. Their mission was simple: heal the wounded and save lives. For the crew, every day was another chance to help, to make the universe a better place. It was a peaceful existence, a sanctuary in the midst of the chaos of the galaxy. The ship, a symbol of human compassion and unity, was traveling through the neutral zone, a space between warring factions where no one dared to attack. The Mercy's hope was protected by the simple truth that it was a ship of peace. Its cargo was not weapons, but hope. On board, the crew was preparing for another day of care. Doctors checked their equipment, nurses made rounds, and medics prepared supplies. There was a gentle hum in the air, the sound of life continuing, even in the farthest reaches of space. As the ship sailed on, it passed dozens of space stations and planets that relied on its services. Humanity's message was clear: no matter the distance, no matter the enemy, Earth's compassion reached everywhere. But peace, as the crew would soon discover, was an illusion. As the Mercy's hope glided through the stars, a shadow loomed in the distance. A massive dark shape appeared on the ship's radar. The Zelor Empire, a cruel and unforgiving alien race, had been watching the human fleet from the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And that moment had come. The first warning came as a sudden, violent shake. The ship's alarms blared to life, a sound that was not familiar in these peaceful corridors. Crew members rushed to their stations, their eyes wide with confusion. A few seconds later, a voice crackled through the intercom. "This is not a drill." The captain's voice rang out, steady but laced with disbelief. "All hands to battle stations." But it was too late. The Zalor had attacked with ruthless precision. Their ships, enormous and heavily armed, descended upon the Mercy's hope like a swarm of locusts. The Zalor had no interest in the lives aboard the hospital ship. They were here for one thing: destruction. The crew of the Mercy's hope tried to respond. They had no weapons, no defenses. The hospital ship was not built for battle. It was built for healing. But despite their best efforts, the ship's systems were failing. The hull was cracked. Alarms screamed as the airlocks began to lose pressure. The ship was under attack, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. "Get to the escape pods now," shouted the captain, her voice shaking, but filled with authority. Chaos erupted as the crew tried to follow her orders. Panic set in as the Zalor continued their assault, their weapons cutting through the Mercy's hope like a hot knife through butter. Crew members and patients alike scrambled for safety, but the Zalor had made sure to leave them no escape. The ship was falling apart. Desperate messages were sent to Earth, calling for help, but it was clear that no one would reach them in time. The Zalor ship hovered above the Mercy's hope, its weapons aimed directly at the hospital ship's core. There was no mercy here. The Zalor had no interest in prisoners. In their eyes, the human hospital ship was a symbol of weakness, something to be destroyed to send a message. With a deafening roar, the Zalor fired their main cannon. The shot tore through the Mercy's hope's engine, causing a massive explosion that rocked the ship to its core. Fire spread rapidly through the hospital ship, consuming everything in its path. The crew's desperate attempts to put out the flames were in vain. The Mercy's hope was done for. As the fire consumed the ship, one final transmission was sent. The message was short, and yet it carried the weight of the entire crew's last hope. "Tell Earth, we need them. Now." The transmission ended. The stars outside the ship flickered as the lights inside the Mercy's hope faded to nothing. The hospital ship, once a symbol of humanity's kindness, was now a burning wreck floating helplessly in space. It was only a matter of time before the Zalor would leave. They had made their point. They had killed, destroyed, and sent a clear message. Earth was weak. Humanity would never be able to defend itself against their might. But they were wrong. Back on Earth, a message had been received. The crew of the Mercy's hope had fallen, But their last words ignited something deep within the heart of humanity. Earth's leaders, who had always avoided conflict, were now faced with a decision. The Zellor had crossed a line they could not come back from. The time for peace was over. Humanity's wrath was about to be unleashed. The stars were about to burn red. The darkness of space stretched on, indifferent to the tragedy that had just unfolded. The Mercy's hope, once a beacon of hope in the galaxy, was now just another ruin in the void. A symbol of humanity's compassion had been reduced to ashes by the cold, brutal force of the Zellor. They had attacked without hesitation, without mercy, and the message was clear. Earth was weak. They had destroyed a hospital ship, an unarmed vessel, and taken the lives of innocent people, leaving nothing but wreckage in their wake. But they had underestimated Earth. On Earth, the news of the Mercy's Hope's destruction spread like wildfire. Across the globe, the loss was felt. Governments, military leaders, and ordinary citizens alike were shaken by the news. The world had never faced an enemy like the Zellor, but something had changed within humanity. The terror of the attack had given rise to something else. Anger. A fire burned in the hearts of the people of Earth, and it could not be extinguished. The message sent by the crew of the Mercy's Hope was clear. Tell Earth, we need them. Now. It was that simple sentence that ignited the fury of humanity. Earth had always prided itself on its peace, on its commitment to healing and compassion. But now, humanity was faced with a choice. Would they continue to stand by, watching as the Zellor tore through the galaxy, or would they finally rise and fight? The decision was made quickly. The leaders of Earth gathered, their faces grim but resolute. There would be no more negotiation, no more peaceful efforts. Earth's military forces, once a symbol of deterrence, would now become the shield of the galaxy. The time for diplomacy was over. The time for vengeance had come. As Earth's fleets began to mobilize, the people of Earth found themselves united in a way they had never been before. Citizens from all walks of life, from every corner of the planet, joined together. The war cry of humanity echoed across the globe. For the Mercy's Hope, the grief, the anger, and the overwhelming sense of injustice surged through every human heart. At the heart of this new resolve was the Earth War Fleet, a massive armada of ships, each one a symbol of humanity's strength and determination. These were not the peaceful ships that had once sailed the stars in search of knowledge and healing. These were warships, bristling with weapons, ready to face the Zellor and show them just how wrong they were to underestimate humanity. The fleet, led by the newly appointed Admiral Alicia Morgan, began its journey toward the Zellor Empire. Admiral Morgan had been a strategist during the Earth Defense Force's early years, but she had never faced a threat like this before. The Zellor were not just an enemy. They were a force of destruction, a force that had no mercy and no regard for life. But now, they were going to feel humanity's wrath. The Earth War Fleet was massive, a powerful sight to behold. Thousands of ships, each one outfitted with the latest weapons technology, prepared for their mission. Their goal was clear: to avenge the Mercy's Hope, to strike fear into the Zellor, and show the galaxy that Earth would never again be an easy target. Admiral Morgan stood on the bridge of the flagship, the Eagle's Wrath, watching as the fleet gathered. Her mind was focused, calculating. She had never been this angry, this determined. The attack on the Mercy's Hope was not just an attack on a hospital ship. It was an attack on humanity itself. It was an attack on everything Earth stood for. And she was not going to let that stand. The ships moved into position, their engines roaring to life. They had received word that the Zellor fleet was in the system, not far from Earth. The Zellor were confident, perhaps too confident, in their victory. They had no idea what was coming. The Earth War Fleet would not be content with a simple reprisal. No, they were going to send a message that would shake the galaxy to its core. The Zellor would learn the hard way that humanity was not weak. Humanity was fierce, and they were not going to stop until the Zellor felt every ounce of that fury. As the fleet entered the system, the first signs of the Zalor came into view. A massive shadow loomed in the distance. The Zalor ships, sleek and menacing, hovered above a barren planet, seemingly unaware of the incoming threat. They had no idea what was about to hit them. Admiral Morgan stood tall, her voice steady as she gave the order. All ships, engage. The Earth War Fleet charged forward, their weapon systems primed and ready. The first shot was fired, a brilliant blast of energy that tore through the cold void of space. The Zalor ships began to retaliate, but it was too late. The Earth War Fleet was upon them, and the Zalor were about to learn a painful lesson. For every ship they destroyed, for every life they took, humanity would make them pay. The Mercy's hope had been destroyed, but its spirit lived on in the hearts of every person on Earth. And now, that spirit was about to burn brighter than ever before. The Zalor had no idea what they were about to face. The wrath of humanity had been awakened, and nothing would stop it now. The battle was no longer just a war between two species. It had become a symbol, a defining moment in the history of the galaxy. The Earth War Fleet had emerged with a fury that none of the Zalor had expected, and now the stars themselves seemed to tremble as the two forces clashed. The Zalor, known throughout the galaxy for their brutal and merciless campaigns, had always thought themselves invincible. They had conquered countless worlds, reduced whole civilizations to ashes, but nothing had prepared them for the wrath of humanity. As the Earth War Fleet advanced through the darkness of space, its weapons lighting up the void like stars falling from the sky, the Zalor ships began to falter. They fired back with all their might, but Earth's ships were fast, precise, and relentless. Each shot from the Earth fleet felt like a punishment, a blow not just against the Zalor, but against everything they stood for. The Zalor might have thought they were unstoppable, but now they were learning that humanity's wrath was a force that could not be contained. Admiral Alicia Morgan stood on the bridge of the Eagle's Wrath, her gaze steady as she watched the chaos unfold. The battle raged on, but her mind was clear, focused. She had seen her people suffer, watched as the Mercy's hope was torn apart by the Zalor, and she was not about to let that loss go unanswered. With every Zalor ship that fell, with every blast that lit up the darkness, she felt a sense of justice, of retribution. "We're winning," Commander Jackson said, a rare note of hope in his voice. He had been with the fleet since the early days, fighting alongside Earth's soldiers, and even he had never seen anything like this. Admiral Morgan didn't respond immediately. She knew the fight wasn't over yet. The Zalor were powerful, and they weren't going to retreat without a fight. She had read the intelligence reports, knew how the Zalor operated, and she understood their tactics. They might be losing now, but they were far from finished. "Keep the pressure on," she commanded. "Don't give them a chance to regroup. We end this today." The battle continued to rage. The Zalor's sleek ships, once symbols of terror, were now being torn apart by the relentless assault of Earth's fleet. Explosions rippled across the dark expanse of space, and the stars seemed to burn a little brighter as the Earth fleet surged forward. But even as the Zalor began to retreat, there was a deep sense of unease in the air. The victory was not yet complete. "We've taken down their forward assault ships," said Lieutenant Alina Reyes, scanning the radar from her station. "But their main fleet is still in orbit around the planet. They're regrouping, preparing for their next move." Admiral Morgan clenched her fists. The Zalor had been dealt a heavy blow, but she knew they would not go down without a final stand. They would not just accept defeat, they would fight to the last ship. But what the Zalor didn't realize was that humanity had no intention of letting them win. The wrath of Earth was far from over, and it would not stop until the Zalor had been driven back, until the Mercy's hope had been avenged. "We've got them on the run," Admiral Morgan said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "Let's finish this." The Earth War Fleet pushed forward with renewed determination. The Zalor were retreating, but they were not done yet. They had one last move to make, one final attempt to break the resolve of Earth's fleet. The Zellor launched a counterattack, a last-ditch effort to save what remained of their forces. Dozens of their ships broke off from the main fleet and moved into position, preparing for a desperate strike. "We've got incoming," Lieutenant Reyes warned, her voice sharp. "They're coming in fast. Looks like they're going to try to break through our line." Admiral Morgan didn't hesitate. "Form defensive lines. All ships, prepare to intercept." The Earth War Fleet adjusted its formation, creating a defensive wall of ships that moved as one. The Zellor's ships hurtled toward them, their weapons blazing, but the Earth Fleet held firm. The two forces collided once again, the sound of explosions and energy blasts reverberating through the void of space. It was a brutal clash, but humanity's resolve was unshakable. As the battle intensified, it became clear that the Zellor were no match for Earth's might. Their ships, though powerful, could not withstand the precision of humanity's strikes. One by one, the Zellor ships fell, their energy shields flickering before they disintegrated into nothingness. The tide had turned, and there was no stopping it now. "We've broken through," Commander Jackson exclaimed, a triumphant note in his voice. "The Zellor's main fleet is falling apart." Admiral Morgan allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. It was a hard-earned victory, but it was theirs. The Zellor had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. But even as the battle raged on, she knew that the war was far from over. This was just one battle in a much larger conflict, one that would define the future of the galaxy. The Zellor had destroyed the Mercy's hope, but they had awakened something far more dangerous. They had awakened the wrath of humanity, and now the galaxy would feel the consequences of their actions. Humanity would not be weak. Humanity would not stand by. Humanity would fight, and the stars would burn with the fire of their rage. As the last of the Zellor ships fell, Admiral Morgan stood tall on the bridge of the Eagle's Wrath, looking out over the battlefield. The flames of victory flickered in the distance, but her thoughts were already on the next fight. The Zellor might have been defeated, but there were more threats out there, and humanity would be ready. As the last remnants of the Zellor fleet were scattered into the darkness of space, Earth's war fleet hung suspended in the void, a silent monument to the unimaginable force humanity had just unleashed. The stars shone brightly, almost unnaturally, casting long shadows on the ships that were now slowly drifting away from the site of the battle. The remnants of the Mercy's Hope, the hospital ship that had started it all, seemed like a distant memory compared to the new, unrelenting wrath of humanity that had now become the galaxy's new fear. Admiral Alicia Morgan stood before the viewport of the Eagle's Wrath, her eyes tracing the trails of destruction left in the wake of their victory. The battle was over, but the cost was high. Thousands of Zellor ships had been destroyed, but many lives were lost on Earth's side as well. Humanity had sent a clear message to the stars. No one would threaten them without consequences, but it was a message with a price, and the damage left in the wake of that fury was something that would take years, even decades, to fully understand. "I never thought we'd get them to retreat," Commander Jackson said, his voice filled with disbelief as he watched the battle-scarred ships return to Earth's orbit. "I thought it would take more. They've been terrorizing the galaxy for centuries, and yet they underestimated us," Admiral Morgan interrupted, her voice firm but laced with exhaustion. "They didn't realize what it meant to have a species that would fight back, not for land or resources, but for survival. We were never meant to be conquerors. We've been peaceful for centuries. But when they struck, they awoke something in us. We've been pushed into a corner, and now we strike back." Jackson nodded, but there was a glimmer of doubt in his eyes. Despite the victory, despite the triumph over one of the galaxy's most feared empires, the war was not over. The Zellor were not the only threat out there. The galaxy was filled with other species, some that would no doubt see humanity's rise as a threat. Humanity had made enemies by taking such a brutal stand against the Zellor, and it was only a matter of time before others took notice. "We've won the battle," Jackson said quietly. But will we be ready for the war? Morgan took a deep breath and let the silence hang between them for a moment. The question was valid, and it was one that had been weighing on her mind for days. Humanity had sent a message, but it was a message that would echo across the stars. It would not go unnoticed. But that was a thought for later. For now, she had to focus on the aftermath of the battle, on the soldiers, on the lives lost, and on what came next. "We'll be ready," Morgan replied, her tone steady but resolute. "We've sent a message they won't forget. The galaxy knows now that Earth is no longer a place to be trampled upon. We will fight. We will survive. And when the time comes, we'll make sure the Zalor are nothing more than a warning to the rest of the galaxy." Meanwhile, in the depths of space, the Zalor were regrouping. Their defeat had been devastating, but they were not easily broken. Their fleet may have been shattered, but they still had their military networks, their communication systems, and their resilience. The Zalor knew how to survive. They had fought for centuries and had come out on top, but this loss would not be forgotten. Earth had sent a shockwave through their ranks, but they had not been fully defeated. Not yet. The leaders of the Zalor military, the War Council, gathered in their heavily fortified command center. The remnants of the fleet were slowly limping back to their home planet, the repairs already underway, but there was a palpable tension in the air. The loss was catastrophic, and the question on everyone's mind was simple: how had humanity done it? How had a species with no history of war been able to outlast the might of their military force? "Admiral, we have lost too many ships," one of the Zalor commanders said, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and disbelief. This isn't possible. We were unbeatable. The humans have something we didn't anticipate," the Supreme Commander replied, his voice cold and calculating. "They have something beyond technology, beyond tactics. They have an unshakable will. They will fight to the end." Another officer spoke up, his voice low. "What do we do now? Do we send more forces?" The Supreme Commander turned to face the officer, his gaze steely. "We prepare. We rebuild. We go back, and we crush Earth." The Zalor had been dealt a heavy blow, but their pride and their empire were not so easily destroyed. They would take time to regroup, but when they returned, they would come with everything they had. And Earth's victory would seem, for a brief time, like a fleeting spark in the dark sky of the galaxy. Back on Earth, the fleet slowly began to disband, returning to their home planet, where they would rebuild and rest. But Admiral Morgan's mind never stopped. There was no time for rest. The message had been sent, but the war was far from over. Humanity had taken a stand, but now they had to prepare for the galaxy's response. The Zalor would return, and when they did, humanity would be ready. They had proven their strength. Now, they would prove their resilience. The battle had been won, but the war was just beginning. The fleet slowly dispersed, the once mighty warships returning to Earth's orbit, their battered hulls still showing the scars of the brutal conflict. It had been a victory, but it was one that came with a heavy price. The Zalor fleet had been driven off, but they were not entirely vanquished, and as each ship turned back toward Earth, the reality of what they had just done began to settle in. Admiral Alicia Morgan stood in the command center of the Eagle's Wrath, her gaze fixed on the holographic map of the galaxy that flickered in front of her. The stars, once symbols of peaceful exploration, now represented a battlefield. The map was dotted with the locations of human colonies and the paths of the defeated Zalor fleet, retreating to their distant homeworld. The map was silent now, but Morgan knew that it was a false calm. The galaxy had been shaken, but it had not yet fully grasped the consequences of humanity's wrath. Beside her, Commander Jackson was reviewing reports, his eyes scanning the data with grim concentration. The Zalor might have been pushed back for now, but the loss of life had been immense. Dozens of Earth's finest ships had been destroyed in the conflict, and countless soldiers and civilians had died. The cost of the battle was still being tallied, but it was clear. Humanity had sent a message, but it had been costly. "Admiral," Jackson spoke, breaking the silence. "The casualties are higher than we expected. Over 30% of our fleet is either destroyed or severely damaged, and the number of civilians lost in the Mercy's Hope attack. It's staggering." Morgan turned to face him, her expression a mixture of wariness and determination. She had seen this kind of loss before, but it never got easier. War was not something humanity had ever wanted, yet here they were, forced to defend themselves in a way they had never thought possible. "I know, Commander," she replied quietly, "but we have to remember why we did this. The Zulor didn't just attack our fleet. They attacked the very core of what humanity stands for. They killed innocent civilians. They destroyed the Mercy's Hope, a ship designed to heal, not to fight. This isn't just about military strength. It's about sending a message that humanity will not be crushed. We will never stand idly by while our people are slaughtered." Her voice held a conviction that made Jackson pause. He had always admired her leadership, but today, in the wake of their victory, the weight of those words felt heavier than ever. They had shown their strength, but at what cost? Jackson nodded, his expression softening. "I understand, Admiral, but we have to be careful. The Zulor will regroup. They won't forget this, and they won't stop until they've made us pay." Morgan sighed, her hand resting on the edge of the map. She could feel the pressure of what lay ahead. The victory had been hard-earned, but the war was far from over. The Zulor would return, and when they did, humanity would need to be ready. "They will come," she said firmly, "but we will be ready for them. Earth's war fleet is stronger than it's ever been. We've learned something valuable today. We've proven to ourselves, and to the galaxy, that we will fight for our survival. The Zulor may have underestimated us, but they won't make that mistake again." Jackson looked up at her, a flicker of hope crossing his face. It was true. Humanity had faced its first true test, and they had passed. But now, the real question remained: could they hold their ground in the face of what was to come? The Zulor would return with even greater force. They would learn from their defeat, adapt, and strike again. And when they did, humanity's resolve would be tested once more. The tension in the room was palpable as the fleet continued its slow journey back to Earth. The warships were battered, their crews exhausted, but they had achieved something no one had expected. Humanity had shown that they were no longer just a peaceful species, content to watch from the sidelines. They had proven their mettle on the battlefield, and the Zulor had learned the hard way that Earth would never be an easy target. Across the fleet, the mood was somber but determined. The survivors of the Mercy's Hope had been rescued, but the images of the destruction they had witnessed would haunt them for years. The galaxy, once an expanse of distant stars and unexplored worlds, now felt smaller. Humanity had a new place in it, and that place was no longer passive. Earth had earned its seat at the table of the galaxy's power players, and the Zulor had made sure of that. Admiral Morgan turned to the viewport again, her gaze hardening as she watched Earth grow larger in the distance. The journey back home would be long, but it was not just a return to Earth. It was a return to a world forever changed. The war had shifted the balance of power in the galaxy, and humanity's role in that shift was only beginning. "We've made our mark on the stars," she muttered to herself. "But the galaxy won't forget this. The Zulor will be back, and when they do, we'll be ready." As the fleet approached Earth's orbit, Morgan's thoughts drifted to the civilians who had perished, to the families who had lost loved ones, and to the soldiers who had given everything in the battle. Their sacrifice would never be forgotten, and it would drive humanity forward, stronger than ever. But for now, Earth would rebuild. The war had been won, but the true fight was just beginning. Humanity's wrath had turned the stars red, and the galaxy would never be the same. The warships returned to Earth's orbit in a slow, deliberate procession. Their hulls were scared, their engines strained, but their mission was complete. The Zulor had been repelled, but there was no time to rest. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Humanity had proven its strength, but it was now faced with the daunting task of preparing for the inevitable retaliation. Admiral Alicia Morgan stood at the center of the command room, her eyes fixed on the holographic display in front of her. Earth was large and full of life, but to her, it had never seemed so small. The quiet hum of the warship's systems filled the room as the fleet settled into position. Yet despite the calm, there was a tension in the air, a sense that something much larger was at play now. "We won, Commander, but we can't let our guard down," Morgan spoke quietly, almost to herself. The words echoed in the command room, but the silence that followed was deafening. Her hands rested on the edge of the table, her knuckles white from the stress of the past weeks. The Zalor fleet had been a test, but they were not the only threat in the galaxy. Commander Jackson stood nearby, his face pale from exhaustion but still resolute. He had been with Morgan throughout the conflict, and he knew what she meant. Victory had come at a great cost. Despite the massive losses on both sides, the Zalor had retreated for now, but they had not been defeated. Their message was clear: Earth was not safe. "We've barely survived one attack," Jackson replied, his voice steady, but tinged with worry. "The Zalor will come again, stronger this time, and they won't be the only ones watching us. The entire galaxy knows now that humanity has the power to defend itself. That will make us a target." Morgan nodded grimly. "I know, but we've learned something important. The Zalor underestimated us. They thought they could destroy us with one blow, but we stood firm. We fought back. And we won. That's not something the galaxy can easily ignore. Humanity has earned its place here." She paused, her gaze shifting to the stars beyond Earth's orbit. The lights of distant ships glimmered in the darkness, a reminder that there was more out there, much more. The universe was vast, and humanity was now part of it. No longer just an observer, no longer just a fragile species clinging to its home. Humanity had shown it could defend its planet, and that had changed everything. "I don't care if they come back. We will stand ready. We will be stronger than they ever expected," Morgan continued, her voice full of resolve. "We've already proven what we can do when we fight for what's ours. This won't be the last time Earth defends itself." Jackson looked at her, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was a rare sight, but it was clear he believed in her words. "You're right, Admiral. We've learned how to fight, and we've learned how to survive. The next time they come, we'll be ready. We'll be stronger." Across the fleet, similar conversations were taking place. Crew members, soldiers, and commanders were all reflecting on the conflict they had just survived. Some were grieving the losses they had suffered, while others were preparing for the next battle. The Zalor fleet had been defeated, but the survivors knew the war was far from over. Humanity had earned its victory, but the stars were still filled with danger. The word had spread across Earth. News outlets broadcasted the victory to every corner of the planet. People everywhere cheered and celebrated the defeat of the Zalor. But beneath the joy there was an undercurrent of fear. It wasn't over. The galaxy was watching, and humanity had just become a target. On the surface of Earth, people went about their daily lives, but they were changed. They had seen what had happened in space. They had witnessed the destruction, the loss of life, and the unimaginable power that humanity had unleashed. And in that moment, they knew that their world could never be the same. As Earth's warships began the slow journey back to the homeworld, the realization set in that the galaxy had been forever altered. The balance of power had shifted. The Zalor were no longer the dominant force in the galaxy. They had underestimated humanity's ability to fight back, and that mistake had cost them dearly. But the victory did not come without its consequences. Earth had lost many good people, many brave souls who had fought to protect the innocent, and those sacrifices would never be forgotten. Memorials were already being planned to honor the fallen. It was a solemn reminder that war was never easy, and the cost was always high. In the aftermath, the survivors began to rebuild. Humanity had survived its first true test in the galaxy, but they knew the path ahead would be long and fraught with danger. The Zellor would regroup, and others would come, perhaps even stronger forces. But no matter what, Earth would never be the same. And as the survivors looked out into the stars, they knew that the future was uncertain. But one thing was clear: humanity would never back down. They had proven their strength, and the galaxy had learned a valuable lesson. They could never again underestimate the power of Earth. And so, humanity's journey in the stars continued. The galaxy had seen their wrath, and it had learned that Earth's people were not to be taken lightly. The next time the stars turned red, it would be with humanity leading the charge. The survivors were ready. The battle might be over for now, but the war was far from finished. Humanity's legacy had only just begun, and in the heart of space, their fire would continue to burn brightly for all to see. As Earth slowly recovered from the devastation of the battle, its people began to understand the true significance of what had occurred. The Zellor had attacked, but they had underestimated Earth's ability to defend itself. The loss of the hospital ship Mercy had been tragic, but it had sparked something powerful in the hearts of every human. They had shown that, when pushed, humanity could strike back with unimaginable force. But Earth's victory was far from complete. The Zellor had retreated, but their scars were deep, and they would never forget the humiliation of their defeat. For the first time in recorded history, Earth was not a target. Earth was a threat. The great fleets of humanity, once composed of relatively small ships with limited technology, now stood as powerful symbols of resistance in the vastness of space. The Zellor had learned that Earth was not just a planet. They were a force to be reckoned with, and this new power had sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. Other species, once uninterested in Earth's affairs, began to take notice. Some watched with cautious interest, others with deep suspicion. In the quiet of the war room, Admiral Alicia Morgan stood once again. But this time, the atmosphere was different. The room was filled with the hum of activity, voices discussing strategies, personnel, and preparations. But Morgan's thoughts were far away, her eyes fixed on the holographic display. Earth's victory had been hard-earned, but it had cost them dearly. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Commander Jackson entered the room, his face tense. He was one of the few who understood the gravity of their situation. He had seen the reports. Earth's war fleet had been instrumental in the defense, but it would need to be strengthened. Every remaining warship, every defense system, needed to be upgraded. Humanity was no longer the underdog. It was now a target, and the Zellor would not forget their defeat easily. "The Zellor will be back," Jackson said quietly, his voice low but steady. "They won't give up that easily. Their pride's been wounded. And they're not the only ones watching." Morgan nodded, her face set in a determined expression. "I know. That's why we have to be ready. We need more ships, more firepower. We need to make sure that when they come back, they never get the chance to strike again." The war room grew quiet as the realization hit everyone present. Humanity was no longer just defending its planet. It was defending its place in the galaxy. The Zellor had learned that humans could fight back, and they had not forgotten the sting of defeat. But more importantly, humanity had proven something to the entire universe. They were not weak, they were not fragile, and they would not be intimidated. In the months that followed, Earth's war fleet grew stronger. Ships were built, technology was upgraded, and alliances were forged with other species who saw the potential in humanity's newfound strength. These alliances weren't formed out of friendship, but out of mutual respect for what humanity had accomplished. The Zellor might have retreated, but there were still threats out there, threats that would require humanity's full strength. It was clear now that humanity had made its mark. The stars no longer seemed so distant, no longer seemed so unreachable. Earth was a force in the galaxy, and the galaxy had taken notice. There was no going back. Humanity would never again be the helpless species on the edge of the cosmos. The Zellor, while they had retreated, were not finished. Their fleet had been crippled, But their hunger for revenge had only grown stronger. Reports of their regrouping filtered in from scouts and spies. They were assembling the new fleet, larger and more powerful than the one that had attacked Earth before. But this time, they would face a planet ready for them. Morgan's mind raced as she thought of the battles yet to come. The Zellor would come again. That much was certain. But next time, they would face a humanity united, a humanity that had been forged in fire and hardened in battle. The Zellor would no longer be able to underestimate Earth's resolve. In the heart of Earth's new command center, Alicia Morgan stood with her hands clasped behind her back, looking out at the stars. The horizon was different now. It was filled with promise and danger, but it was also filled with hope. Humanity had shown that it would not be defeated. Earth's wrath had turned the stars red, and the galaxy had learned a harsh lesson. The coming conflict would be the ultimate test. It was no longer just about defending Earth. It was about protecting everything humanity had worked for. The warships would be ready, and Earth's resolve would be unbreakable. The galaxy had learned that Earth was no longer just a peaceful planet to be conquered. It was a force that would defend its home at all costs. And so, Earth's war fleet would stand ready, waiting for the day when the Zellor returned. The battle would not be won with mere ships or weapons. It would be won with the strength of humanity's spirit, a spirit that would never break, no matter the odds. As the stars shimmered above, humanity's war fleet sat in orbit, prepared to meet any challenge. The war might not be over yet, but humanity had already made its mark. They had sent a message to the galaxy. Earth was no longer a place to be conquered. It was a place to be reckoned with. And that galaxy would soon learn was something no one would ever forget.